Hi, my name is Mike Gainey. I'm from Master Clock Repair, and this video is designed to help you put a Herschede movement back into your case. Specifically, if you've had it repaired by me or someone else, you'll need to know how to get the movement in your cabinet, all the parts, and get the clock running. Doesn't matter how good somebody repairs it, if you can't get it installed, you're not going to get the clock running. So this video is to help you understand how to do that. Now please understand, there are many Herschede case styles. There are too many variables for me to cover every single situation. I may talk about some of those variables as we go through this, but nevertheless, the information I give you should be enough for you to adjust to your individual situation. Okay, so let's say you're ready to reassemble the clock now. The first thing you might be tempted to do is just start putting all the parts in, like the movement first and then the other parts. But it's very important that you pre-level and pre-stabilize the clock. It's very true that you may end up moving the clock after you do that. For instance, if you're going to have the back off to get the tubes in. True, in some situations you can actually mount the tubes from the front, but I can't possibly cover every situation. So for the sake of this demonstration, let's assume you will have to move it. And so you don't want to have to move it at any point with all the parts in it. So if you do all your pre-leveling and pre-stabilizing and you know what your plan is, then you'll be ready once you get all the parts into the clock. So what you need to do to stabilize the clock is to create something that will close the gap between the back of the clock and the wall. Whether your clock is on carpet or on a hardwood floor or tile, it doesn't matter. Stabilizing the clock is very helpful. It'll enable you to enjoy your clock more. When you come up to open the door or wind the clock, the tubes won't swing around, the weights won't swing around, you won't hear the clanging of the tubes. Even if you're on a hard floor like tile or hardwood, if you're not on a slab and you've got a crawl space or a basement, you'll find that if you stand in front of the clock and jump up and down or even just shift your weight, the floor will have a certain amount of give to it. So even in those situations, it's still good to bridge that gap. Now, when you're placing your clock flat against the wall, this method works very well. If you're going to put it in a corner, that's much more difficult. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what I do when I deliver these, I've created some shims that I carry with me in my toolbox. Something like this block of wood here, I just buy this strip of wood from the hardware store and cut it into small pieces. Or I even buy lots of yardsticks and I sacrifice them as shims. I just cut them in small, like 3/4 inch by, whatever the width of the yardstick is, and I can stack as many of these as it takes to get the right thickness to bridge that gap between the wall and the clock. Now, what are you going to base that on? Well, it depends on how close you're going to put the clock to the wall. Generally, you want the back bottom of the clock to rest right up against your baseboard running around your floor. So the thicker your baseboard, the thicker the shim's going to be. And so again, with something like this, where I have these small pieces, I can stack 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these together. And then if 5 is what it takes, I'll run some masking tape around this. And generally, I'll just tape it to the back of the clock. You want to tape it to some part of the clock that's nice and stiff. I usually don't tape it to this frame because it's hollow in the middle with the cloth. I want it down here where there's more meat. So it would look something like this. where I'm going to use this one so I don't have to tape them together. Just take a piece of tape, put it around your shim, and tape this to the back of your clock. Now, you got a really nice case, maybe you don't want to put tape on it. Tape is certainly better than gluing it on there, but if you don't adhere this to the back of your case in some way, this is going to fall out. And if it falls out, it's going to be hard to get it back on because it'll fall down between the clock and the wall. You'll have to move the clock out to get it back in. If this tape leaves any residue, typically it'll come right off with Goof Off or Goo Gone or some kind of product like that. If you still don't want to do something like this, I've seen other people take a more elaborate action, and understanding with the frame and the top and everything on, you can create some sort of an L that will set on the top. And the thickness of this will equal whatever you were going to use here. But because it's like an L, this part is going to rest on top of your clock, and there'll be no need to secure it because it can't fall off. You know, it's setting on the top of the clock. So this is a great way to stabilize the clock. It'll be tremendous help to you. And then, of course, what you'll do, once you've created that, you're going to turn the clock around, you're going to push it up against your wall, and then you're going to play with your levelers or your shims. Like I said earlier, most tubular bell clocks have no leveling feet, so you'll have to use shims. So again, things like I did here, these make good shims. I also use paint stir sticks. They're much thinner. A lot of people buy those wedge shims that carpenters use when they're, leveling doors in the frames or windows. Those will work fine too. But you want something that's not sticking out of the side of your clock when you're done. So I find things like this work really well. And again, coupled with the stain sticks or the paint stirring sticks, things of varying thicknesses will usually get you where you need to be. So when you push the clock against the wall, if you're on carpet, you're going to find that the bottom of the clock is going to be resting on that tack strip under your carpet. Once it rests on that tack strip, you're going to find the clock is wanting to lean way forward. And so you've got to have to block the front up quite a bit. And so remember, you're doing two things. You don't want the clock to lean back too far. Of course, your little shim here is going to keep that from happening. But you also want to get it level left to right as well. A little bit of a lean to the rear is fine. You don't want it to lean away from the wall. That's bad. Leveling left to right is much more critical. Specifically, or in situations where you had a repairman repair it, he's probably adjusted it to run level. You're going to have to get it level or you're going to have trouble. So you're going to turn the clock around, you're going to push the bottom of the clock all the way up against the baseboard. Then you're going to figure out how many shims do you need to put under the front of that clock to get it to touch the wall. This is usually where I start. I don't worry about left to right yet. I get it where it'll get on the wall. And if you're on a hardwood floor or tile or whatever, you don't have to worry about settling like you do in carpet. If you're going to get it on carpet, then if you have a 1/2 inch of shim, because that's what it takes to get the clock to lean on the wall, you got to remember that shim is going to settle deep down into your carpet. So you're going to need to add some extra height to allow for that. I would, in that situation, with most people's carpet they use today, I'd add at least 1/4 inch to whatever your stack is. If your carpet's super thick with super nice, thick, spongy pad underneath it, you might double it, okay? Just remember, you don't want it to settle after you get all these parts in. Don't go crazy. You don't need to build it up 2 inches, of course, typically, but use the smallest height shim you can that you think will allow for settling. So after you've got your clock leaning back against the wall the way you want, a little bit of backwards lean is fine, but not too much, just a little. Remember, you don't want the tubes to be resting against the back of the clock down at the bottom. So with the bottom of the clock pushed all the way up against the wall, you're not worrying about your left to right level yet. You're going to create your shims to get it back against the wall. You're going to make your shims thick enough to allow for settling. This clock's going to be really heavy with all the parts in it. You got really thick carpet, it's going to settle some. So remember to make your shims a little taller than you need to. So now you have your clock very stable, resting against the wall. You can walk up to it. You can't shake it. Because it's leaning on the wall. Now you're going to put your level. A good place to do that is on the opening in the inside of the door. Open the door, that little ledge that you saw me resting the weights on, put a level right there, and start looking at your left to right. That's going to mean that you're going to be adjusting those levels, those shims that you put in the front on the left and the right. You may find you need to lower one or raise the other in order to get your left to right level. Again, if you as I said before, most Herschede Tubular Bell clocks do not have leveling feet on them. If your case is empty and you're waiting for the repairman to get your clock done, think about putting levelers on there. It'll save you a lot of trouble. You can get levelers at home improvement stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. So that won't be a problem. But make sure the threaded part that mounts into the bottom of the clock is made of metal, not plastic. It's too much weight for a plastic threaded sleeve. You'll have to drill holes in the bottom of the clock, of course, to allow for the leveler to go up through the threaded portion of the leveler. And you want the levelers somewhat close to the corner, but not so close to the corners of the clock that when you drill that hole, you drill right through the side of the case somewhere. So be careful with that. Okay. So you've got your left to right level, your front to back level, the case is nice and stable. Now you're going to start putting stuff back in. Herschede movements fit into these cases in different ways. So in this instance, I could, if the top was on the clock, and I only had the back off, I could very easily just slide it right in the back, just like this. If there was no back, or sometimes the Hershedes, this whole piece is just one giant piece. And it's often screwed on, but you could unscrew it. You might be taking 25, 30 screws out to get that off. So again, look at your case, how it's made. Of course, you may have taken it out yourself, so you kind of have an idea. But if it had a solid back with a top that come off, you can always take your movement in through the top. You get your pulleys in your hands, you drop the cables down gently, take the movement over the top. It's kind of awkward. You're going to have a step stool or something. Hold on to the tube rack, guide it in as gently as can and lay it right on here. There are some Herschede Tubular Bell clocks that the front design of the case allows you to slide it in and out from the front. Again, this is not that case. There's the decorative front, the corners of the clock come in thick enough, there's no way you're going to slide that in there. So again, in this instance, it's going to be quite easy for me just to slide this in on these runners right here. So that's what I'm going to do. At least for me, the way I repair these is when I give them back to my customers, the cables are completely released. Others may send you home with the movement with blocks on the pulleys and the cables wound all the way up. If that's how they do it, that's fine. To each his own. So in my instance, Again, the cables are all loose. They're all the way unwound. I'm going to put the pulleys into the cabinet. I'm holding onto this very firmly. I don't want to lose control of it, obviously. I'm going to slide it. You got to get the dial. You see the bottom of the dial. You got to clear this frame here. Now you see the next thing here. You don't want to slide that in and jam this thing up. So you got to lift it up a little bit. Get it in there. If you push your door closed, make sure it's latched. It's going to go up tight, basically, to the door frame. But of course, when you run these screws up through your seat board, you want them to go into the holes that were already there. You don't want to make new holes. Sometimes I take these out and I find that different people have screwed them in to different places and there's multiple holes there. If there's multiple holes, you got to figure out which one you want to get those screws into so that when the door is shut, the dial is centered in the frame. Okay, so the movement is now securely, the seat board is securely screwed down to these runners. While I was screwing that in, I just thought to think, you probably want to hand start the screws. Just start them in with your fingers. If you've got that seat board not lined up where the holes in the runners and the seat board are lined up and you just grab your cordless screwdriver and try to ram them in there, if you miss the hole, that screw may hit the flat bottom of the seat board and tilt it back and have this thing tip out of there. So you want to make sure you got everything lined up before you run your screws up there. So now I have the movement screwed into the case. It's nice and firm in here. So the next step is to get your strike tube in first. Generally, it is the longest tube. You can lay out all your tubes in order, long to short. Take your longest tube. If you've got a short ceiling, you're probably going to have your front door open so you can get enough of an angle. You're going to get this all the way down. Remember, the tube might be slick, so get a good grip on it. Then you've got to get this to hang on this little post over here. Depending on how your clockmaker set this up, there's 3 grooves in this post, and you got to make sure you get the tube, the string on the tube hanging in the right groove. You can pretty easily tell if your clockmaker did a good job that the tube is going to rest maybe an 1/8 inch from the tip of the hammerhead. Now, some clocks, because of this little cage right here, will not allow you to get the tube past this cage with the movement already mounted. So sometimes, before you screw the movement in, you'll have to lift this movement up with one hand and get this under the cage with the other hand. You don't have to lift it up very far, usually 1 inch or so. In this case, you can see maybe a 1/2 inch. But in this instance, I have 2 other ways to do it. One is simply to slide it around the cage. The other is to get the bottom of the tube in the far corner, and I can tilt it where it will go under the cage. But trust me, there's a fair number of clocks where there's no room between these 2 pieces to get it, and the cabinet is either not tall enough or the tube is too long where it won't tilt under there. So be aware of that. So I can get it. If I tilt it back enough, I can get it around the cage. And this tube is kind of slick. It's wanting to slide through my fingers. I'm putting it on the first groove. The groove nearest to the center of the clock. I can see the hammerhead is just about an 1/8 inch away from the tube. Adjusting these hammers and things is something we'll cover in a different video. Okay, so now we've got our longest strike tube in. Now we got to put all the other tubes in. Now, sometimes you can put these tubes in through the front without any problem. And if you can do that, then at this point, you could go ahead and put the back on and everything and get it up against the wall. In this instance, for this video, I'm going to go ahead and mount all these tubes. Remember, the longest tube hangs on the left. as you're facing the clock. So if I was facing the clock right now, the long tube is going to be on this side, and it's going to go in descending order to the right. With the exception of course, the longest straight tube, which is also on the right. So again, just a recap. If you think you can get them on in the front, if you took them off from the front, you can probably get them on from the front. And you could have the clock all the way up against the wall, again, assuming your top lifts off. And I can't say I've seen many Hershedes that you weren't able to lift the top off. So I'm going to take my next longest tube. Again, being careful you don't run the tube through one of the sets of cables. So you want to avoid your cables. And your tube on the rivet. Naturally, some clocks have 2 sets of rivets per tube. So the string goes around 2 rivets. Hopefully, the strings that hold your tubes to the rivet are sound and not too old and rotting. If that's the case, you may want to replace those strings. These are in pretty good shape. If you're not sure how to tie your own tube strings and get them the right length, have your clockmaker do that for you while he's repairing your clock. You can see I'm setting the knot off to the side. Remember, don't push the tube through one of the pulley cables, through one of the weight cables. Holding those cables to the side. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is go ahead and put these back panels back on the clock. You can leave the top off for now, because you may need to get in there for something. Go ahead and put these back panels on. You've already got your shim here if you needed it. Okay, so you can see I've got these 2 panels back on. Now I'm going to turn the clock around and get it up against my wall. In this situation, I don't have a wall that I can put it up against. So I've leveled it left to right and front to back. And on this carpet, this is very thin indoor-outdoor carpet laid on top of cement. So I don't have any settling issues with this carpet. But you can see the case is fairly firm, just a minimal of rock, which is just due to the slight thickness of the carpet and the give of the levelers. But overall, it sets nice and firm. Now, if you're gonna put your clock in a corner, and you got a hardwood floor, and you have a crawl space or a basement, there's not much you can do beyond just leveling it left to right and front to back. It's going to be difficult to stabilize it using the wall because there's nowhere to hide your shim. And usually because you have a baseboard running around your floor, in order to get these to touch your wall, the clock is going to have to lean back too far. It would be unsightly to put some sort of a wall shim here. So in that case, you're probably going to just simply freestand it. The same is true with carpet. If you can't get it on the wall when it's in a corner, practically speaking, and make it look good or keep it from leaning back too far, you're just going to have to freestand it. And you're going to have to hope that whatever shim system you're using is sufficient to burrow deep into the carpet and settle nicely. If you have levelers in your cabinet, that's going to make your life a lot easier. Fortunately, these clocks are very heavy, and so they will settle very well. But again, when you go up to open the door of the clock, to wind it, to set it, to regulate it, when you're opening the door, you don't want to have the clock, wiggling around. So you need to make sure you've got your clock as stable as you can, given your circumstance. When you're setting your clock up, we talked a little bit before about putting it on carpet and the need to freestand it. The reason it's so important that a clock be stable is because if your clock is wobbly, it will have a tendency to stop, even though every other part of the clock is perfect. It's called sympathetic vibration. Because you have the swinging pendulum in the clock when it's running and the weights changing the center of gravity of the clock, typically if your cabinet is really unstable, when the weights get down to a position where they're near the swinging disc, the clock will stop. So please, when you set the clock up, do everything you can to make it set as firm as possible. Do not put a board under the clock. Putting a board on top of a piece of carpet doesn't really help unless you remove the carpet where the board sits, or if you screw the board through the carpet into the floor. If you put a board or a piece of granite or slate or whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't care what it is. If you put the clock on that, the clock is sitting on that on top of the carpet, you are spreading the entire weight of the clock amongst all the square inches of that board or that piece of marble. That will never settle. It will never burrow down deep into your carpet. I'm sure you've seen when you move a couch or a chair and your carpet, you see these big divots in the carpet. That's where those feet sunk down deep into the carpet, squeezed your carpet, squeezed your pad down, and got those feet as close to your hard floor as possible. If you put something under the clock, it's never going to settle right. Your shims will settle. Your leveling feet will settle. Just imagine, again, the weight of this clock settling on 4 little round levelers. That's a lot of weight on those 4 individual points versus all the square inches of some sort of a slab. Okay, so that's not going to solve your problem. Typically, again, unless you screw it to the floor or remove the carpet altogether. So here's an example of what you don't want. I've got the clock level. I've got my level placed down here inside the door frame. It shows perfectly level. But when I go up, I can rock it back and forth. This is not good. 3 of my feet are pretty good, but this left rear foot is too far up in the case. I need to move it down in order to eliminate that. A little bit of movement still. Okay, so now I'm level and stable. Now in this situation, I don't have a wall to put this against. I don't have a proper wall. I got a partial wall here. But for the sake of the video, I'm freestanding it. On this floor, I've got indoor-outdoor carpet on a cement slab. So there's not a lot of give to this carpet, hardly any at all. So you can actually level this fairly well on a floor like this. This will not be the situation that most of you find yourself in. So again, the case is, I've got my level down here. The case is level left to right, front to back. And when I walk up and touch it, the only amount of play there is what little give there is to my carpet. We want it as stable as we can. You can see the tubes are far away from the back of the clock. Lots of room there. So even though I have a little bit of a backwards lean, it is not causing the tubes to hit the back of the clock. Now the next task is to put the pendulum in. I'm going to show you via a different angle in just a moment the side view on a movement that's not already in the clock, so it'll be easier to film. So I'm going to grab the pendulum and show you the front view. You've got this little piece here that sits down in between a device that's split like this, and it's going to set right in there like that. There's 2 little grooves on either side of that this is going to rest in. Then you have this is your impulse pin. There's a little fork that this is going to go in between. Again, we'll get another shot of that. But for right now, I'm going to put this in the clock and get it behind the cables. I'm going to make sure that this is standing straight up. It's not cocked to one, tilted to one side. I can look in through the side glass very easily. And even without a flashlight, I can see fairly well to get that seated. And then you won't see it very good yet, but that impulse pin I just showed you is inside this 2-pronged fork. If this is your impulse pin, and your fork is over here or here, don't expect your clock to run. It's got to be like this. Okay, so the next job is to hang the weights. And like I showed in the video about taking a clock apart, it's really nice if you can set some sort of carpet here, or I'm sorry, a towel to protect this inner part of the door. I usually get the heavy weight out of the way first. I'm going to put my gloves on here. Remember, the heavy weight hangs on the right. Most Hershedes, if you look at the bottom of the weight, it'll have the initials CT for chime train. So pick this weight up, lay it gently on the ledge. I like to point all my hooks the same direction. In this instance, they'll be pointing to the right. I'm going to untangle the cable, untwist it, I mean. Get the cable in the grooves on the pulley. Then I'm going to be pinching the cable into the grooves on the pulley wheel so it doesn't come off. And now, because this weight is so heavy, again, you got to keep the cable on the wheel. Okay? Now I'm going to grip it with my fingers. I'm going to lift it up gently. Set it down gently. That's the easiest way I've found to do it. The middle weight is marked on the bottom. It has, well, this is actually the other weight, although they're just about always the same. The middle weight says TT, that's for time train. Set it on the carpet. Make sure the cable's not twisted. Flip the pulley wheel around, get the cable on the pulley wheel, mount that in there. This weight's not so heavy, so I can just use my gloves. Again, you gotta keep that cable in the wheel. Lift it gently into the clock. I'm going to maneuver my pad a little bit. This is the strike one. It says ST for strike train. Untwist the cable. Make sure the cable stays in the pulley wheel. Lift it into the cabinet. Drop it down. All right, so now we've got all the parts in the cabinet. Now, when you go to wind this up, your first wind is the most critical wind. Again, when I bring a clock back to a customer's home or I give it to them to install in their own cabinet, I have the cables all the way run down. Unless your clock is leaning forward or leaning too far backwards, there's no reason that when you go to wind this, that it should not wind up nice and smooth. I'm going to show you a picture now of what the cable will look like when it's fully wound. There's no crisscrosses of the cable. Each cable lays right up next to the other cable. You can see in this other picture I have here of a barrel that has no cable on it, that there's grooves in the surface of that barrel. It's not a bunch of individual grooves. It's one groove, like the groove on a record player. So that groove runs from one side of the barrel to the other side. It's going to start in the front and wind itself to the back. And there's no way that we want the cable, when you start winding it, to jump on top of the previous cable or to skip a rung, to skip a groove. If you do that, it's going to reach the back of the barrel too quickly. We don't want that to happen. So when you first install the movement and you get all the parts in, you don't want to wind these up all the way. You want to first look in through the side. Hopefully you've got some kind of a glass panel. Shine a flashlight in there. Make sure that the pulleys, that there should be no cable on the pulleys. And when you make these first few turns, you want to be looking in there. I just put maybe 2 wraps of cable on it. So I'm watching in through the side. My weight is not swinging around. It's going to go straight up. Okay, so I've got one wrap, 2 wraps. Those cables ran right next to each other, like this, not like this. Or I should say, not like this, but like this, okay? All right, so I don't want to wind it all the way up yet because I want to make sure everything's working in case I should need to take it out again. If I need to take it out at this point, I've only got a few wraps of cable on there. It's much easier to deal with. So again, I would shine a flashlight in here so you can see really good. If the cable wraps on top, if the second rung of cable wraps on top of the first rung, that probably means your weight's swinging around or the cabinet is leaning forward. And so the cable wants to wrap forward instead of backwards. If it skips a rung, you probably have the clock leaning too far backwards. Or again, the weight is swinging around. And we don't want that to happen. So I can reach over here, look through the side, confirm I don't have any wraps on there. Just give it 2 cranks. I just want to get enough of a wind so that I can power the clock and see that it's functioning. Now, of course, I can swing the pendulum just gently. Let's make sure we get the clock to run first. Okay, you don't want the pendulum wobbling, of course, so be careful how you get it started. And the next thing you're going to do is listen to the rhythm of the tick. When we repair these clocks for people, we know that the stand that we're testing the clock on is perfectly level. You can probably see these Hershedes that I'm testing on these stands over here. So these stands are level, but more importantly, we put a level on the seat board to make sure that it's level, so that when the customer gets the clock home and levels it, hopefully they don't have to set the beat on the clock. So I can tell, you probably can't hear it in this video, but the rhythm of the tick is quite even. Tick, 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 tick. Very even tick, and that's what we want. If it's out of beat, you're going to have to set the beat of the clock, and we'll show that on a separate video. The next thing to do is see if the clock is chiming okay. Now this may or may not be in sync since I had let the clock run down. Okay, so we're on the Whittington chime. It's 1/4 after, the Whittington chime plays 8 notes. We just heard 8 notes. So we're good there. We're going to get 16 notes here, or 2 sets of 8. Quarter till, we're going to get 3 sets of 8, or 24 notes. And of course, at the hour, we'll get 4 sets of 8, or 32 notes. We are getting some competing chimes from other clocks right now. single strike, and there's 1 o'clock. So you could go on and play the other chimes if you'd like. Westminster, of course, is the 4-note pattern. Canterbury is the 6-note pattern. So here at quarter after, you get 2 sets of 6. Now, it might be necessary at this point to adjust some of the tubes, some of the hammers, so that they're striking the tubes properly. I know we do our best to get that as close as we can for you. We typically ask the customer to give us 1 tube that we can use to test the clock with. Like this clock over here I got, we asked for the shortest tube, and we simply put 1 tube on, we adjust the hammer, and we move it to the next rivet and adjust that hammer, and so on down the line. So we try to get the sound of the clock as even as we can. But with all your tubes, without having everything installed, all the weight pulling on the tube rack and everything, we can't always get it perfect. So there's another video I'm going to make that shows you how to make all these final tweaks if you need to. But assuming your beat's right, your clock is chiming, it's playing the different tunes and everything, the only thing left to do, of course, is wind it up. Finish winding it up, set the hand, set your moon dial, and away you go. Again, we're going to cover that in a different video. Something else that's very important. If you happen to be adjusting the clock, adjusting the hammers, which you would do usually through the top, or if you're lucky enough to have doors on the side that open up, you may make the clock chime and strike a lot in a short period of time. And it's possible that with this little bit of a wind you put on it in the beginning, you may actually run the weight completely out. So if you're making the clock chime and you're adjusting the hammers, you're trying to get it just like you want it, and all of a sudden it won't function, remember, you may have run it out. So don't be afraid to wind the clock up some more. Of course, at this point, I've checked everything. There's probably some tweaking I can do to the hammers, but I'm not worried about that right now for this video. So in that case, I can go ahead and wind the clock up. Now, again, it's a good idea in your first wind to keep an eye on those cables to the side. Once that barrel is full of cable, you want to stop winding it. Typically, when I put new cables on it, I will have the barrel full when the top of the pulley is within about 1 inch of the bottom of the seat board. So, looking into the side and watching the pulley, I'm going to come up right now. I'm about 1 inch down from the seat board. My cable barrel is completely full. And we don't want to go any higher than that. Nor when we wind it, do we want the pulley to actually hit the bottom of the seat board. That will add a lot of stress to your cable ends. And on a clock like this, with heavy weights like this, you surely do not want your cables to break. So you've got it wound up. Now, depending on what time it is, of course, you would set your hands. We're going to cover all the hand setting rules in a different video.